Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let us know you're
Welcome,
here.
welcome.
Share your name, your pronouns, your place, and how you're being tested instead of rested.
Welcome, y'all.
Who's here with us? We're getting ready to have this conversation about rest. We have rested, we have vacationed, we have celebrated birthdays. We've done some of everything. Just been chilling, trying to get ready for this conversation because all of us are being tested every day. And so we're excited to engage in this kitchen table conversation with whoever's out there ready to talk with us.
Welcome. I'm not able to see the. You can see who's joining like via
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah, I
Okay.
have two screens up. We have a few people joining us. Welcome. Hopefully, you are signed into your YouTube account so you can chat with us in real time. Looking forward to seeing who's here.
Hey, Erica. Welcome.
Welcome. Glad you could make it, Erica. Share with us how you're being tested instead of rested. That's our conversation for this kitchen table this evening. How are you being tested instead of rested?
Mm.
Welcome. We see you coming in. Let us know who's here. Your
Welcome.
name, pronouns, place. You'll see it all on the ticker and how you're being tested instead of rested. Got a low key start for this evening. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you all coming through to chop it up with us tonight.
Yes. Trying to get our zen on, if you saw my pictures, I was having fun and with Kermit the Frog and Prince and the little puppy. Oh my God, the puppy with the zen on. That was just too much. Welcome, you all. We're looking forward
welcome.
to engaging with you in the chat. So if you are not already logged into your YouTube account, that's the best way for us to hear from you because we want to hear you in the chat. So we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Give everyone time to get in and get settled and get your water, get your snacks, take a drink. Just water, y'all. Part of that rest is being hydrated
You ain't lying. Ain't lying.
because
Being
one of
high.
you get sick real quick without having water in
Mm-hmm.
your body, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Welcome. Those of you just joining us, if
Hey,
you are
Carolyn.
not logged into your YouTube account, please do so because we want to hear from you in the chat.
Welcome. Hey, Carolyn. Welcome.
Notice the ticker, share your name, your pronouns, your place, and how you're being tested instead of rested.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
So I'm going to share my screen. I didn't know. There I go. I look at the word share. See, y'all? I'm tired. I clicked the word share instead of slideshow because I think that's what it is on that other platform that I use all day, every day. I think you have to click the word share. So my brain was like, share. Now you're supposed to
Oh,
be
good.
clicking the other button right next to it. So now that we got that out of the way, looking forward to sharing this collective space with you all this evening. We're excited to have this conversation. Dr. Green laughing at me. I know it's one of them days. So I want to welcome you to this conversation. I am Dr. Angela Ward, and I am an anti-racist educator, mother, wife, daughter, cousin, friend. And for me, sharing this collective space with you helps me to stay rested. And so my last nerve is tested when I think about the fact that it is hard to find and maintain a collective in this work. So when we find those places, when we find those people, so like Dr. Green is a part of my collective, when I find my people, they know I stick like glue. And so you can't get rid of me. And so another way my last nerve is tested. So we have this word anti-racist because there's this thing called whiteness that exists. We talked a lot about that in our conversation a while ago with our white women who are doing anti-racist work. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, check out our YouTube video when we were talking to 3 white women about being white women in this work. But whiteness puts up so many barriers and tests your nerve, tests my nerve, day after day after day after day, because I have to navigate, um, yeah, I have to navigate people, I have to navigate systems, I have to navigate ways of being that are, what's the word, rigid in many cases, and trying to figure out how to be a person who does this work with love. So I'm approaching this work with love, and then I'm hit with barriers that kind of knock me upside the head. And I don't want your love here. Like love don't live here kind of thing. Right? I don't know who said it. It's not mine, but I've heard it. Love don't live here no more. But
Mhm.
it just don't live in white spaces. And when I say white spaces, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about the way society is organized, the way it operates, and the way I'm forced to just be daily. So how are you tested, Dr. Green?
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about who you are and how you're tested.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ward. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time tonight to be in conversation with us and hold this collective space. I'm Terrence Green. I am, excuse me, I am a son of Detroit. My family, I'm a third generation Detroiter, part of the first and second waves of the Great Migration up to Detroit. And so, who I am and who I've become and who I am becoming, I think is significantly informed by the place and the context of growing up in Detroit. I am also a father. I am a husband, a partner. I am a brother. I am a son, and I am a learner. in this work. So we approach this work with a deep sense of radical humility. White supremacy tells us that we have to be, and whiteness tells us that we have to be all knowing.
Yep.
But intellectual humility tells us that we are all learning, that we're all becoming, and we're constantly learning. My pronouns are he and him. And when I think about, the testing, what just gets on my last nerve, um, I just hate hypocrisy. And I think
Mm,
more than anything that just it gets to me is organizations that proclaim anti-racism,
mhm.
but show fire is racist in the mug. And I
Say
would
it
much
again,
rather
show fire? Did you say show fire? Say
show
what?
fire, show enough.
Show
Ra-
enough. That was one of them. Okay, I'm like, he said show fire? He just
show
said show.
fire.
Remember, we're at the kitchen table, y'all.
Oh, and we're gonna set this table for y'all in a minute. But I would just much rather people be authentic in who they are, so at least I understand what I'm dealing with. Um,
I
and so
can
that
that, but yes.
that gets up my last nerve, because it's difficult for us to engage without truth.
Right.
And I believe because whiteness and white supremacy is predicated on lies, it just becomes like the organizational norm and routine that's deeply embedded in schools, institutions of higher education,
Mhm.
nonprofit organizations, so
Yeah.
on and so forth. You can name them all. And so that is what gets on my last nerve and what tests me. But the beautiful part of being this collective,
Mhm.
we're going to talk about how do we also hold the tensions of constantly being tested, but also finding and creating that space to be rested, right? Because we realize that we need to be our full selves to do this work, and the importance of that. And so we want to first just welcome you. We want to set the table by sharing how we enter into this collective space. And we want to acknowledge the space, the physical land in which we are on. And so, Doc, do you mind if I just start off with the sharing this collective space and how we position this work?
Go for it. Do you want me to do
So,
the land first?
okay, you can do the land first.
I will. I thought I turned my thing off. I'm like, yeah, he can hear me. So we always start with the land acknowledgement, and we've had guests who have their own land acknowledgements also. And we want to share this land acknowledgement that we've used throughout our time. So we come to you from Central Texas on the ancestral lands of the Tonkawa, Karankawa, Comanche, and the Coahuiltecan. As anti racist educators, we recognize that this land acknowledgement is a small step toward redressing the stories and practices that erase Indigenous histories and the presence of Indigenous peoples in our current reality. We recognize our responsibility to hold space for the histories, current day reality, and ongoing history of Indigenous peoples. We share this land acknowledgement to urge you to learn more about the Indigenous communities where you live, where you lead, and where you work. Bless you, because we at the kitchen table. And so we really want to make sure that we honor and we recognize that we show up to this space as two Black American people, US American people born in this country. And in many ways, any indigenous roots that we may have, we don't know about because of the way the world has gotten us to this particular point in history. And so we do our part to acknowledge the land that we sit on because we need to honor that as anti racist leaders. And so I'm going to pass it on to you, Doc.
Yes, yes. And we also deeply honor the blood, sweat, and the tears of enslaved Africans that are also in this land. This state, which is now currently known as Texas, as late as 1860, there were over 182,000 enslaved Africans, over 30% of the population. And so we pay homage and honor to the ancestors, and we acknowledge the indigenous people of this land. As we enter into this conversation and setting this table, we position ourselves in a deep position of inquiry, right? We just said before about we're always in this constant state of learning and have never reached this pinnacle of knowledge, right? One of the things I talk about in class is like really trying to move beyond this hierarchy of wokeness. Oftentimes you'll have people to try to one up you. Well, I read so and so, and I studied with so and so, and I was mentored by so and so. And I'm like, awesome. That's great. You know what I'm saying? You bring that into the collective is not something that you use to rank, to compare us. And so we enter this into deep inquiry. We enter with just as many questions as you, if not even more. We unapologetically center our lived experiences of who we are and what that means. And we ask that you also do that. We also enter this conversation in community, understanding that we are not the end all be alls, or we don't enter it as like isolated people, but we understand the connectivity of the human experience, and we understand the ways in which race and racism has shaped and is shaping that lived experiences. And so this is not a space where it's like, add water and stir. Here go to 45 things you do tomorrow to end racism in your school. They don't exist, right? We don't have that, and we don't purport to have that. We understand that this work is deep, systemic, is structural. These are adaptive issues. These are not technical things that we are dealing with. And so we enter holding those realities, those tensions, but we also hold the beauty of the brilliant possibilities that exist as we engage in community.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green, for starting us off with that. And I want to share this definition of anti-racism because it frames what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. So anti-racism is the purposeful act of actively addressing systemic racism and systemic inequities personally, professionally, and socially. An anti-racist educator is conscious and aware of their personal bias, their worldview, and how they are privileged or marginalized racially. An educator is anti-racist when they actively disrupt systemic racism and inequities from their own sphere of influence, and they partner with other anti-racist educators. I'm going to pause there because just by the simple fact of us saying anti-racist, we are making a commitment to our collective that we're not teaching anyone about racism, that you come to this conversation understanding what racism is, that it is a real thing, and that it impacts all of us, regardless as to what race we were born into as people in society. And so every race is impacted by racism, some more than others, but all are impacted. And so we unapologetically center our collective in people who are anti-racist, and they come to this conversation understanding what that is, what that means, and they have their own active way of being and thinking because they've already come to that conclusion on their own. And so we partner with those people, with other anti-racist educators, to enact collective disruption, because you can't collectively disrupt an institutionally racist system by having to stop and start because the people that you are working with are not understanding how race impacts them and you. And so we purposefully work with people who understand this on their own and have their own lived experiences to draw from. Because institutional racism and systemic inequities are real, and they are a big part of how we're tested instead of rested. And so it's your turn. What's coming up for you as we start this conversation? And we want you to think about how you're being tested instead of rested. And so, Dr. Green, I'm going to let you start. Go ahead and talk. And if you aren't already logged into your YouTube account, that's how we hear from you in the chat. So thanks to those of you who are talking to us, and continue talking. We're listening.
Thank you, Doc. I definitely want to engage in conversation about rest, but I think even before we talk about rest and this idea of test and the tensions that emerge between these, I actually I've recorded a blog on this. I just haven't edited it yet, and I think it's apropos here because working in systems of white supremacy, um, they are designed to kill you, right? They're not designed to give you life.
Mm,
And they can literally kill you emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, and literally physically. There are people that have died engaged in this work. And so I've been thinking about kind of like this typology of what happens. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and that testing piece and talk just very briefly about rest. But one of the things that the system will seek to do is it'll seek to drain you. It'll seek to drain you. It'll seek to drain you of your intellect. It'll seek to drain you of your energy. It'll seek to drain you of your stamina. It'll seek to drain you of your racial history and heritage. It will work to drain you. And then if it can't drain you, it'll work to try to defeat you, right? Because it'll go from draining to defeating. You keep coming up against these systems and the cultures and the ways of doing and the ways of being, and what that will try to do, it will try to socialize you into this place of being constantly defeated. And if
mhm,
it can't drain you or defeat you, it will try to deplete you, right? So it'll try to literally deplete, Doc, like everything you have. You like, I ain't got nothing else to give. Y'all didn't took everything up that I didn't had that I have brought. And so that's what these systems are designed to do.
I ain't trying to let that happen.
They ain't trying to let that happen. Yep.
Ain't trying.
Trying to deplete you. And so this is what you have to be cognizant of. You have to be aware of who you are. You have to be aware of the signals that your physical body is giving you.
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of the signals that your mental health is giving you. Be
Mm-hmm.
aware of the signals that people in community are giving you,
Yeah.
because they will try to take you from draining you to
Mm-hmm.
defeating you to depleting you so that, Doc, it can delete you.
Oh, my girl so we talked to Ismailis last month, November. We were talking, Ismailis was like, girlfriend, you can't do all that, you
Mhm,
know? Really,
mhm,
because I get to that space. So like you're making me think, Dr. Green, about how so like as a Black woman doing this work, just as an educator, period. So educators, we're accustomed to doing everything. So like you have your classroom, you have your lesson plans, you have to set up your classroom, you have to communicate with parents. It's like you have your own little office space and you're running your whole little system in your classroom. And so when you take that educator out of the classroom and put them into another space in education, you can't take I couldn't take that brain out of the
mhm,
classroom. That classroom brain followed me to central office. It followed me to the school space, to where I was no longer just a classroom, but I was responsible for all the classrooms. And I kept thinking like a teacher and adding more things to my plate. Well, I've taught, so I can coach a teacher to do this particular thing because I see it, right? I understand the steps she needs to take, or he needs to take, or they need to take, however they identify pronoun wise. And I see it. I know how to help them. But then I got all these other things. I have this long laundry list of things that I have to get done, and I try to figure it out and I try to do it all. And so I took that with me to central office. I took that with me to, just anything that I was doing. I never took that. I got to do it all. And being a Black woman on top of that, and I got to do it best, better. And I can't show any cracks, right? I got to
mhm.
make sure I'm on top of things. And so it gets draining, and it's not something that can be maintained. And I had to find ways to check in with myself. I had to find ways to just be. And I have to remind myself daily, that's not your battle. You can't do it all. And that's what came up for me. Is like I said all
Mhm.
that to say every battle is not mine. I can't do it all. And I have to be good with that. Even when I see, oh, yep, I know what that is. I've been down that road. Because in this work 25 years, you see it. When you see it, you know what it is, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I have to do that self-talk. No, can't do it.
Mhm. Mhm. That I think that segues perfectly into, I think, one of the ideas around rest is, one, we come to I think there's a degree of wisdom where
Mm,
you come to the realization that, first, that this work is intergenerational, and the reality that this work never has nor will it ever be about one individual person. And I think there is a sense of hope, radical hope and expectation that we have to have, that this work won't stop with us. And this work can be all consuming, but I think part of resting is realizing and coming to the realization that you cannot do everything. I had two instances in my life as an educator, one when I was a teacher and one while I was a professor, where I ended up in a hospital
mm,
because my heart, I just one when I was a teacher, I thought I was literally having a heart attack.
mm,
That's how overwhelming. And I was in my young 20s, you know what I'm saying? I'm probably 25 or something.
mm.
And I literally fell out in the office. I was in the front office about to talk to the principal or something, and I just fell over. And I had just gotten so overwhelmed with everything, thinking that I had to,
Do
just
it
thinking it
all.
was centering me, you know what I mean? But it literally, physically,
Mm,
weighed in on me. And I think there's a degree of wisdom, like you were saying, that you just realize you can't do it all, nor have you been commissioned or assigned to do every single thing.
mm-mm, not at all. And it's what are y'all saying? Looking at the chat.
Wow.
Anxiety is something that's coming up for people. And
Wow.
that sounds a little bit like what you felt too, Doc. And you made me think about my first year teaching. First year? Yeah, first year. I had a health scare also.
Mhm.
And it manifested as anxiety, and it was stress, but they told me that stress isn't what causes my condition. I'm like, but I know I'm stressed. I've never been stressed like this before because here I am thrust into a classroom, and my degree wasn't in education. So I was literally making it up as I was going along and trying to figure it out. And so rest for me, God has a way of just putting you on your butt, right? And so I had to sit, reflect, rest. And I'm wondering too, thinking about our current reality, because people will say, well, you don't know because you're not here. I was in schools when we had to shut down for this reality that is um, I don't like using those names, those words that flow around, but this health crisis that we find ourselves in, that causes mitigation requirements, that causes schools to shut down, that causes people to come to board meetings yelling at board members because they don't like this and they don't like that. And you've watched it, you know what's going on in the schools. I've been in that space where having to, figure out how do I help this baby in the classroom, knowing that they have to have this mask on, they have to, I have to be safe, they have to be safe, the other children have to be safe. And at that time, we really didn't know a whole lot. Things were changing daily as we were learning about this health crisis. And so none of us had ever been in schools in this way. We had to approach school in a way that we'd never approached school before. But the thing is, and I wrote about this in one of my articles, that schools are course correcting. And so for me, when I think about rest and I think about that test, the testing of our rest, I'm thinking about the fact that daily we're tested. And I try to hold a healthy balance of, yes, we are in this health crisis right now. And there are schools that have been operating in crisis every day before this, and the whole world was not shutting down to come to their rescue. And so, my question to people is, how are you reaching out to those schools to see how they're managing this crisis right now? Are they in even more dire straits because they've been doing stuff by themselves? Or are people actually coming to their rescue now that everyone's being thrust into this space? And I was talking to another of my colleagues who was raising the fact that people who have, and excuse me if I say it the wrong way, I'm learning as an anti racist educator, disability justice, basically. So, in spaces where we are, our privileges in regards to our abilities, be they, bless you, be they physical, be they mental, be they abilities that are visible to everyone or not visible. You know, the people who are not privileged in those ways have been having conversations about, you know, the world shut down and everyone immediately thrust into these mitigations and these ways of being that kept healthcare at the forefront for everyone. And so those are some other things that I think about when I'm thinking about rest. You know, how do we thank y'all for putting things in the chat. We won't stop, can't stop, won't stop. Absolutely. Good to see you, Doc. Yeah. What's coming up, Dr. Green? What's coming up for y'all in the chat?
You know, I think one of the missteps, I think, even in this moment, is that we are in the midst of a health crisis, but far too many schools and districts still want to function as if we are not, um, which
Well,
is
it's the states too.
sure, sure,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. This education ain't worth dying for. You know what I'm saying? What is being given out? This ain't worth. It ain't no this schooling actually because it ain't even education. Completely different things. Carter G always said. Carter G. Woodson said there are two types of education: the one they give you and the one you give yourself. And the one that they giving out, it show ain't worth dying for. It ain't that type of education. So
Mm-mm.
that creates an additional layer there. I think one of the things too, I've been thinking a lot about how do we, and one of the questions we think about rest, and you were talking about this before we got on, is like, how
Mm-hmm.
do we create, find, and connect with communities of care, right? Understanding the importance of, yes, engaging in self-care is a radical revolutionary act, we know from Audre Lorde. And we also know that how do people think about radical communities of care? And what does it mean to show up in your school
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow with a teacher who has to cover another class and they feel like they babysitting? There's 50 people in there. How do we show up in a spirit of radical humanization and humanity, but also in a spirit of radical community care? What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we start to engage in that praxis, even within the context and the constraints of everything that we have? And I think this is where there's always, in the midst of these pressures and these crises, there's always concurrently possibilities that are radical for us. When I say radical at the root, there are these radical possibilities for us to engage in. So what does it mean to start to practice to be a community of care for the
Mm-hmm.
folks that you're working with? Because again, the reason that we both had those situations when we were teaching is that, like, you literally feel racism. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
literally You can it
You
be
can cut it with a
embodied.
knife. You
Can
can
cut
cut it
it,
with a knife.
can
It's
slice it.
thick. It's
It's
thick.
thick. You embody it. You can, and so you can embody these things. One of the profound things we just celebrated, MLK. You know, one of the things in the autopsy, you know, he was assassinated at 39.
Mm-hmm.
But when they looked at his heart, they said his heart, he had the heart of a 67-year-old.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was so much that it just, and he, you know, he couldn't talk to nobody because J. Edgar Hoover encountering the COINTELPRO, they would have been there, but it
Mm-hmm.
had really, you, my point is that you physiologically can feel this and it
Mm-hmm.
can begin to store up. And so the question that I'm bringing and trying to think through and enter into is like, how do we be, create, and connect to like communities of care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, that's part of my opening, is that it's hard to find these places and these collectives and be in those spaces, because those are the places where we get fed and where we feel the space to rest. Like you can be in those spaces with those people and just breathe and just release. And Carolyn is asking, so it's school not worth dying for, but how do we care for those who have nowhere to go during the school day? And so I can say that when I think of school, I'm thinking of the people. I'm not thinking of the institution. I'm not thinking of schooling in the individualistic way in which it is designed. I'm thinking of the schools where children and adults feel like they are human, where they feel like someone cares for them, where they know because the actions of the other adults are a caring and humanizing space and way of being. When I say school, the school that is not worth dying for is the school that erases you, the
Yeah.
school that ignores you, the school that children
Mm-hmm.
walked out of today because they're being
Mm-hmm.
required to go to school
Mm-hmm.
because the powers that be say y'all ain't getting no money if y'all don't have butts in the seats. Well, the
Right.
babies say we gonna walk out before y'all even take roll today, so y'all still ain't gonna get no money from us today. We gonna go home because we got cars, and those of us who don't have cars, we just gonna walk out. And so children are finding ways to use their voices in these spaces because we are being thrust into, and we've always been here, right? We've always been in spaces where we're not allowed to be human. We're not allowed to think outside of what is acceptable. And thanks for coming. We appreciate you. Oh no, we ain't talking about COVID. Mm-mm. She put that word in there, and I said it out loud. Nope, we're not talking about that. We're talking about resting. We're talking about how, as anti-racist educators, we find ways to care for each other, to care for ourselves, and fight back when people say, I ain't got time to take care of myself. You got to find time to take care of yourself because the world needs you and the world needs what you have to offer. And if you're not finding time to rest and take care of yourself, whatever that is for you, you're not going to be able to do anything for anyone, and um, you're not going to be able to do anything for anyone. And so, yeah, that's the test of rest. We're tested every day, and we're trying to hear from you to see how you're being tested and what ways are you pushing back. What else, Doc?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And thank you for that question, Carolyn.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I'm when I think about school, you know, Shuzai and colleagues have this great book about so much schooling but little education, or something to that degree. And
Mhm.
when I think about schooling, I think about mechanisms that teach you your place in society. And when I think about education, I think about this liberatory experience and project that teaches you to transform society. And so when I say school is not dying for, I'm talking about any mechanism that is trying to dehumanize you and teach you to accept um, these pre-existing hierarchical places in society. That ain't it. Ain't it. And I think if youth have always been resistant to that, you know what I'm saying? They've always been resistant to that notion of being socialized in school. Even just giving an example that Dr. Ward just shared. I think the way we care, I think our notions of care um, are more should be and should be more expansive than thinking about schooling. I think that's an important question and a phenomenal question that leads to a different set of realities. And so, yeah, I think if we led with the radical care and the radical dignity and think about even communities of care, which I think can function outside of schooling, but also can show up in spaces of schooling. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what's coming up for me. But I thank you for asking that question. I think that's a
Mhm.
super important question.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So what's coming up for you all in the chat?
I think
Yes.
the what's coming. I can't even see. Let me see.
Go
I,
ahead, Doc. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say. I think one of the beauties of this is that we don't have to give that which was given to us. So, in other words, like we don't have to reproduce the ways in which we relate to people,
Mm-hmm.
um, the ways in which we care for folks that were given to us from a white supremacy system.
Say more
Um,
about that.
yeah, what I'm saying, like there is an agency to practice something otherwise than what we've always known and what we've always been given, right? Just
Mhm,
you know, we don't have to reproduce that, right? So we can think about how do we practice a community of care,
mhm,
even if what was what we experienced was a community of no care, right? We don't have to just continue to practice that and pass that on with the folks that we're engaged with. We can practice something otherwise, and this is what
mhm,
the social movement folks call this prefigurative politic, is this
mhm.
idea of practicing now that which you want to be in the future, but you can circumvent this
Yeah.
idea of time and temporality, and you can actually start engaging it and practicing it now. It may not be practiced on a larger systemic structural level, but you can start to practice it in your community in which the people that you're connected with. So that was the other thing. Like we
Mhm,
don't, you know, just because we work with people who are gatekeepers, we don't
mhm.
have to be gatekeepers. We can be gate breachers. Like we can breach those gates, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm saying we don't have to give that which was given to us, particularly if it was given in these oppressive ways. That's the beauty, I think, of our collective agency.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. That collective agency, and yeah, I keep coming back to the tests. And so the tests that come up, what are some tests that come up for you as you work with educational leaders, Dr. Green? When you think about educational leadership
Yeah.
and anti-racism, what are some tests that or that you see and that you experience through the eyes of those that are leading schools and school districts?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think one of the things what we just talked about there is that test of will you reproduce the same thing that you were given, right?
Mhm,
And it's interesting. Um, I would talk to people and they would say, "Well, there's really nothing I can do because I'm not actually a teacher." And they were like, "Well, there's nothing I can
mhm,
do because I'm not the AP." They was like, "Well, there's nothing I can do because I'm not the principal. There's
mm,
nothing I can do because I'm not the superintendent." They're like, "There's nothing I can do on the board." I'm like, "Well, I think there are opportunities for us to exercise agency wherever we find our place, and I think that test of Um, how do we do something otherwise or conform to what the system has already given us as our archetypes and what we should be? So that's a test. I think you about to say something?
I'm just looking at the chat. Carolyn was saying she had an issue where she heard a second grader say that's racist, and she listened in to see. Thank you for listening in to figure out what was going on. Another student was calling that student Black, so I'm guessing that student was not phenotypically showing up with brown skin or Black skin. Talking about himself, not the student who said that's racist. And I said that's okay. He is Black, and that's a part of him. Gotcha. Yeah, 200 character limit. Yep, just like so. Yes, thank you for listening to those conversations. So the boy was Black, and so not a part of his vernacular, perhaps. This non-Black student said it was racist that he said he was Black. Interesting. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for listening to the conversations that the students are having, because often a lot of things go unsaid and unaddressed because teachers aren't listening in, or they may jump in and say something without getting a good feel for what's going on. So yeah, it doesn't matter what the race of the other student was, because that could have been two Black students, because it happens in our schools. And if a teacher is not paying attention, a child may get harmed because of how the teacher either engages or does not engage. And so I'm glad that she was listening in. And so, Doc, you were talking about, yeah, it's important. We want y'all to talk to us. So I'm like, let's talk.
Please do talk.
So, what you were talking about leadership and what you were noticing and what you noticed about leaders, because I know it's hard for a leader to rest also. For me, being a school leader and then being a central office leader and now working at the national level, I always, say, and I think, when I was in the classroom, I was responsible for all of those children. When I was working for a school, I was responsible for that whole school. And at central office, I said my role is to support 80,000 students, 88,000, whatever the numbers were that year. And now it's a national audience. And I'm like, that's weight when you radically care and you come in with this radical humanity and humility doing this work. And so what have you heard from leaders, and what have you experienced with leaders and leadership yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely want to lift up and name that and just share mad props and thanks to all the folks who are working in schools right now. I mean,
yes,
it is tough. It is tough from, unprecedented. And so people who are, continuing to show up in the midst of a health crisis, in the midst of everything that is going on, we're deeply indebted and thankful and grateful for the work you're doing. So I don't want to in any way undermine or sugarcoat the reality in which people are finding themselves in, from
absolutely,
driving buses, paraeducators, serving lunch, classroom teachers, administrators, everybody. So thank you. So I definitely want to just name that.
Thank you. I agree.
I think continuing to do this work just in this moment is a test. I'm seeing that a lot of people, just in this current moment, it is tough. I've talked to, I can't tell you several, I was going to say tens, but it's probably not in the tens, but several people who are teachers and administrators. They're pretty much done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that this moment has been very testy, given that everything that is going on and the demands that are still constantly placed on folks working in school.
Daily. Absolutely. And and I want to reiterate, we thank you for your service. We thank you for the work that you do. We thank you for showing up. We thank you for being in community with children, with their families. Yes,
Mhm.
very testy, very testy. And we thank you for coming and showing up this evening, to
Yeah.
listen to what we have to say, and talking with each other in this chat, because we want to find spaces like this to check in with each other, because if we don't practice a community of care, we're not going to be able to move beyond anything that's thrown at us. And I've shared with people in this national space that yes, this thing happened to us. It's still happening to us. And believe it or not, things are being layered on top of this in schools.
Mhm.
Schools are still trying out new curriculums. They're still bringing on new technology systems. They're still trying new this and new that, and they're sticking it in old, decrepit,
Mhm.
putrid
Mhm.
spaces that are not necessarily communities of care. They're not necessarily, and then there's principles that create these communities of care. They created them prior to this global health crisis and the racial uprisings that we've experienced and will continue to experience. And those things were pretty much dismantled, through the need to mitigate, the need to follow these new rules and protocols that are stuck in place, because people at the decision making level for large school systems are not necessarily operating in a community of care. They're often operating in a community of compliance. And
Mhm.
so when compliance is the standard, how are we able to deal with those tests? When I think about compliance, I think about steps that I need to take to protect myself. And I think about great, yes, ASCD is a great resource for knowing about communities of care. Learning Forward is another good organization that puts out lots of great information. Um, and I know you all know some others, so please continue to put those in the chat for each other. And I know some more will come to me as we talk. But communities of care. So when I was on a campus, one of the things that I did as a teacher, I made that community in my classroom. And that's where I spent the majority of my time. When I became a campus administrator, I found ways for the campus community to be a community. And so I would, make sure that we were doing things like, taking the teachers brownies in the middle of the day on a whim just to brighten their day, or we literally found a way to shut all classes down and have a science day at an elementary school. And so and we found a way to give teachers an extra planning period. So it wasn't that the teachers had to
Mhm.
do the science days. It
Right.
was me, it was the leadership team, it was parent volunteers that we could find, and it was staff who typically were not in the classroom all day, every day. Um, Yes, sometimes as a teacher, you are constrained to your classroom. And so as a teacher,
Mhm.
I use that to my benefit. And I worked with my students to make that classroom community as safe, welcoming, and inclusive as I could with their help. And so we talked a lot about, what they needed as children, what I needed as their teacher, and how we could create that space together. Did the same thing with adults. Like I told y'all, when I left the classroom, I took some of those same lessons with me to school leadership and district leadership. How can we create a space in this school where students and families enter and they feel like someone sees them, like someone cares? Like I had a principal who shall remain unnamed, but they would you would be the only one in the hallway, walking down the hallway, and this principal would not look at you, would not talk, and they hadn't seen you all day, but they walk right by you like wasn't nobody else in the hallway but them. I'm like, that's not caring. That's not community. That's tunnel vision. And I understand if you're having a bad day. Now, that was her. That's how she operated. It wasn't about no bad day. It was about that's who she was. She didn't want to talk to me. Okay, fine.
Mhm.
And I was the only Black staff member on that campus. So that's just add another layer to that. Only. Wasn't nobody else on that campus Black. Everybody was white. I was it. Not that I'm saying I needed special treatment or anything, but I'm a staff member. I work here. You hired me. Can you say hello? It didn't even have to be good morning, love you. None of that. Hey, I see you. You
Yeah.
know, that's care. And it goes a long way when teachers are having the tough time that they're having right now, navigating all the things that have to be navigated right now. You know, I help clean tables in the cafeteria. I carried a walkie-talkie and helped the principal. I helped give students masks when they got out of the cars in the morning to make sure they were ready to start the day. You know, where do you need me? You know, as a central office staff member, I went to the campus and said, hey, I'll be here. What do you need? And if they didn't know at the time, I paid attention and I found stuff that I saw they needed and I did it. And so it's all hands, it's looking for, you know, what are those things that are gonna, if you're having an okay day, and I'm not saying because we're all tested, if you're having an okay day, how can you help someone have a little bit better day that may be having a horrible day? And so recognizing that no, every day is not going to be rosy and everything's not going to be great because it's the reality that we're working in right now and living in. But how can we extend a little bit of joy? I think that's missing too. I think the test of rest has to do with how do we find joy in our school spaces? How do we create joy in our adult spaces, in our workplaces? How do we create the feeling of safety and identity? And so I don't mean like safe from I'm not talking about white comfort when I'm talking about safety. I'm talking about, you know, that principal walking down the hallway and not saying, "Hey," you know, or not even just draw eye contact and like, "I see you." You don't even have to say anything. Just a little head turn and smile. That goes a long way. That says, "I see you." And that brightens people's day. And it may be the only thing someone needs to feel that rest and that to be able to take a breath because rest has a lot to do with just being able to breathe and often we're holding our breath, right? We don't want people walking around schools holding their breath. So
That's so good, Doc. You said something there that I think is super powerful, and I think it is something I'm trying to practice in my classes in all communities is collectively asking, what do we need? You know what I'm saying? Like, what do we need? You know, to feel a sense of thriving in this moment. What do we need to experience joy? What do we need? And then thinking about how do we use that and thinking about like how might we start to practice that, right? And I think that can be powerful even if it ain't with your whole school. It might be with your professional learning community. It might be with the teacher that you co-teach with or co-plan with or is on your team. It may be with students in homeroom. It may be with, you know, like what do you, and again, it may not, I think sometimes I'm super guilty of this. I in the past would discount the micro because I was so enamored with wanting the macro large structural change, and I would discount what I could do in a smaller community. But like how powerful would that be? And this is where we go back to the ideas of design, right? Understanding that school systems and the hierarchical relationships have been intentionally designed to be oppressive,
Yep.
this is where we can start asking new questions to redesign that, to do something differently. But just like tomorrow, like, what do y'all need? What do we need in this space with everything going on? And then how might we start to practice that? I think it'd be powerful. But you know what, Doc? A lot of people, there's a thing. Sometimes people just don't ask. You know, it's easier to assume than to ask. But just even that, stopping to ask is a powerful act of connecting in a sense of communities of care.
That's what we found. And I know we're at time, y'all. So if you got to go, love you. Appreciate you being here. I want to say this before we close. You know, when you mentioned sometimes people just want to be asked and we don't even think about asking the question. And I say ask because I'm from Texas. So I gotta really work on enunciating. So, but when we reached out to students and asked them their opinion and created a space, a student equity council, the students came to that first meeting on fire.
I bet.
They were ready.
Yep.
And I don't mean ready to blow it up on fire. I mean ready. They knew what they wanted to talk about. They had ideas. They had processes in place. They had crews ready to hit the floor and go. And someone remarked, in many cases, these babies just had never been asked before. They just needed someone to open the door and say, you're important to us. We see you. We want to hear from you. And we were really intentional about who the students were. We said, we know you educators because we're educators. We know you're going to go to the teacher pleasers. We know you're going to go to the student council presidents. Bring those in. And yes, we're on Twitter. I'll put it in the chat. Or Doc, can you put it in the chat? Oh, yeah, you got it. We reached out to the students and we reached out to the adults and said, we want the students who are existing on the margins of your schools. We don't just want the teacher pleasers and the students who are not, the students who don't give you issues, who don't test your rest. We want the students who get on your last nerve. We want the students who are high frequency office visitors, because you know what? They're leading in some way because they're getting your attention and they're so getting so much of your attention that they are causing you and they're causing other adults the need to attend to their needs. How do you spell yours, Dr. Green? L Green, right?
Yep, TRANCE.
Yeah.
L Green.
Did I do it right?
That looks about right.
Okay. That's us on Twitter. And so just wanting to make sure that we're thinking about, sometimes people just need you to ask the question. You know, how are you goes a long way.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that's all I have. You have any final words, Dr. Green, as we close out?
Now I see like it's heating up now because this asking thing because one of the most powerful things I've seen recently was a school, and I forgot where it was. I may have been out in California, but they were doing these like teacher observations. And they asked the students if they wanted to observe the teachers and give the teachers feedback on their. It was powerful. It was almost as if they were like, I've been waiting on y'all to ask me. And the teachers, to hear the reflection of those teachers, like post observation from the students' perspective, it was powerful. But they were like, we had never thought to even ask students to observe our teaching and to give us feedback on it. But that asking, go ahead, Doc.
And the thing that comes up for me is, who's closest to the problem you're trying to solve?
Well, there it is.
Why ain't you ever thought of asking the children? Like I asked my first graders, I'm like, hey, I would make mistakes on purpose just to see if they would say
Mm,
anything because they had been socialized in
mm,
pre-K and kindergarten. I'm teaching first grade. They have been socialized not to question the teacher. I'm like, hello,
mm,
how
mm,
you gonna know what you don't know if you ain't questioning me? I don't know it all.
mm,
And
mm,
my first graders taught me a lot. My fourth
mm,
graders taught me a lot. And when I started working with high school kids from central office, yeah, I left central office and got out of that building and did things with high school students because I wanted to know the things that I was doing at central office. Is it even reaching them? And what
mm,
should we be doing to reach them? Because I don't have all the answers. And they
mm,
just wanted somebody to come and ask. And they're like, you do
mm,
what? How do I
mm.
get that kind of job? I'm like, baby, I don't even know. But this is what I did, and those are the kinds of conversations I had with students because
Mm,
they were looking at college and they're trying
mm,
to figure out, well, what steps do I need to take? What degree do you have? And we were having adult conversations about next steps in life,
mm,
but as early as first grade, I gave my students permission to say, Ms. Ward, that ain't right. What you mean
mm,
that ain't right? You
mm,
trying to say I can't spell? Now,
mm,
Ms. Ward, you know what I'm saying? But we would joke with each other, right? And we would create that space for them to say when they made a mistake, oh, it's okay. My teacher makes mistakes all the time. I'd be correcting her. And they would go home and tell their parents, I correct Ms. Ward all the time. She'd be spelling words wrong, mama. And the parents would tell me, I'm like, my, my kids are smart. They teach me so much.
mm, mm,
But
mm.
it goes a long way, right?
Yep,
It goes a
yep.
long way. And I experience joy by teaching that way.
Mm, mm,
And my students got a sense of thriving because they
mm,
felt like they had something of value to add.
mm.
Even working in a school that was morally demoralizing,
Sure,
that
sure.
was that was like on the bottom rungs of the system looking to be shut down daily. That's the kind of schools I started in. And I still found a way to find that space and create that space because it was important to me to speak life and to give joy in any way that I could find.
Yeah, you just got me thinking, what possibilities are on the other side of our ask?
Yeah.
Like what
Ooh,
are the possibilities that are on the other side of it? The possibility of everything you're talking about with the student youth council and your first graders and the middle school students, like, and they were so invested in the process, and the teaching had gotten so much more robust when they were observing, like, but what's on the other side of asking, like, what do we need in this space? How can we thrive? I just think that is something, people are always like, I need some tangible, give me some practical. Here's
oh,
something
give me some
practical.
strategies.
Here go your strategy. Just ask
Ask
from
a
a
question and
spirit
receive it.
and receive it.
That's
And that's the thing.
You gotta receive
That's
it
the
and you
thing.
gotta be ready.
Yep. Yeah,
Because you
yeah,
can't,
yeah.
you can't, we didn't bring
Hmm.
students together in the Student Equity Council and then let them talk and then ignore them.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
we picked the right adults to
yeah,
engage with them because we knew they would listen, we
yeah.
knew they would nurture, we knew they would
Hmm.
coach, we knew they would support. It's not about pulling that stuff together and
Hmm.
creating this space. It's about what is the space, why the space, and what are the deliverables that you are going to fuel in the students. And it's
Yeah.
not shutting them down. It's not making yourself look good by creating this
Hmm.
space. It's
Hmm.
about those possibilities. What are the
Hmm.
possibilities? Being open to them, listening, and creating that space for the students to share that with us.
Hmm.
Yes. Thanks for sharing that. When you listen to the students and issues that matter to them, but it's listening, but then it's also what are you going to do with that? because it's a gift.
Mhm.
Students don't have to tell you anything.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
Yes.
When people
Yes.
have marginalized populations and groups
Yes.
of people who are othered, like students are othered in schools, it's always
Yes.
been mind-boggling to me. Students are the ones who should have the loudest voices and be heard the most and
Mhm.
listened to the most. But when they give you the
Mhm.
gift of sharing,
Gifts. Gifts.
it's a gift. And what are you gonna
Mhm.
do with that? Yeah.
Woo-wee. Now I mean, you have to. We're talking about. I know we're at time, and but this last quick thing, we're talking
Thank you
about
for hanging with us.
this piece about really entering this work with a sense of humility. Because when you ask for real,
For real, for real.
you gon' it's gonna be a humbling experience, and I
Mhm,
think through that humility is where these new possibilities can be created, though, right? You know what I
mhm,
mean? Because
mhm.
they are literal gifts that help this larger collective, but there is a sense of humility, and I don't know, like maturity, to be able to take it.
Maturity, that you hit the
Mature,
nail on the head, because I was
because
thinking when you said humility and yeah, the maturity and
yes, yes.
the willingness,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
it's like the system has an ego.
Mm,
And so when I think about the system and
mm.
people make up the system,
So good.
yet the system's
So good.
ego flows through
So
those
good.
who feel like they have something to protect.
Mm, mm, mm,
And when you come up against that
mm,
protectionism,
mm,
that either or thinking,
mm,
that um,
mm,
paternalistic way of being, that it's
mm.
my way or you can go kind of thing, it's tested.
Yeah.
It's it's those spaces where you hold your breath and you realize you haven't been taking deep breaths, you've been taking short, shallow breaths,
Woo.
coming up against this ego,
Come
and
on now.
it's like you embody it because it's just like yuck. It's all
Yeah.
over you. It's putrid. It's you
Mm,
yeah. And
mm.
that ego limits, erects barriers,
Come on now.
it pushes people to the side,
Come on.
it makes people sick,
Mm,
literally,
mm,
and it makes people do things that are against humanity, like
mm,
their own sense of self and humanness. And
mm,
it like eats you up if you're not aware enough to know it and see it for what it is.
mm, mm.
The system has an ego.
Ooh-wee. I gotta send my offering in on that one. 'Cause you didn't just drop the whole word on that now. Woo! Let me get the system got an white supremacy culture is a culture of protection. It is
Mhm,
that egotistical,
mhm,
narcissistic culture. And that if
mhm,
we are not cognizant of it, we can embody and reproduce that. But we got to puncture that which wants to be protected. Because
mm,
when we puncture that,
ugh,
that what is
he's got
available
sick.
once that is once that is the possibilities that are available there. But yes, there is this institutional
That's
ego that white supremacy culture has. And
mhm,
so when we're coming up against it, we feel the test because we like, I ain't got no ego. What what
and
y'all?
and they looking at you with the side eye like you got an
Mm-hmm.
ulterior motive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, ain't nobody worried about you.
Mm-hmm. Ain't nobody studying you.
Ain't nobody studying you. I'm thinking about these babies that you harming that
Mm-hmm.
don't have nobody out here to protect them from
Yes,
you and
yes,
your ego.
yes,
And why you got an ego? It ain't
yes.
your money. These
Mm,
ain't your resources.
mm,
These are taxpayer dollars
mm,
in these
mm,
public
mm,
schools. And don't get me started on
mm.
public schools.
Mm, mm.
And what they doing right in front of our eyes.
Mm, mm, mm,
Just look at New Orleans is all I got to say.
mm, mm.
That's all I got to say.
Woo-wee. That is so good. Mm, mm, mm,
Mm.
mm. Wow, that's powerful.
Lord, we gonna
That
have
is
to clip
powerful.
this one, y'all.
That is good. You ain't lying. It's ego.
Mhm.
You can't. The ego won't even allow you to ask, or
No,
if you ask, you can't receive the gifts
can't
that are
receive the
given
gifts.
because ego
Mm-mm.
is that
And,
institutional
and
ego.
and that ego, the babies is that's what made me think about the babies is what made me think about the system has an ego
Mm,
because when we're trying to create space for babies, people are always looking at, okay, what's the what that Mo really
mm, mm.
it that ego is getting in the way of progress that
Yeah,
I see. I'm trying to progress and create opportunities for children to progress and not be marginalized and demoralized and put to the side and squashed.
mm,
You know,
mm,
I tell a story about my oldest who just turned 21. He was in third grade. It took us 3 years to get that boy back on track in his
mm,
mental headspace
mm,
because of what ego did to
mm.
him. The system has an ego, and that
So good.
ego tried
Mm,
to squash my baby, and I wasn't having it.
mm, mm, mm,
It took us
mm,
years to get him back to a
mm.
space to where he felt worthy, he felt smart, he felt like he
Yeah.
was, you know? Yeah,
Woo, that is good.
I'm sick to my stomach. Ugh, because that's what it did to me when I was in that system. And it's it's not that public schools are the only place where that ego exists. It exists in organizations that
Yeah.
operate from a white supremacist frame. That those systems, all of them have an ego. And that's what keeps the suppression, the oppression in check, in not in check, in place.
Yeah. Right in place. That's so good.
Keeps it in place. I'm just sick
Wow.
to my stomach thinking about it.
No, that your yeah, this is it's illuminating to think about it in those terms. So thank you for sharing that with us. You on the money. You own the money. Mm,
I might have to write about that.
you need to for sure.
Yeah, that might be a chapter.
That is in that that's in there because that's
Mhm.
yep.
Yeah, that might be a chapter.
That is it. Yep.
Because I feel it. I'm embodying the ugh of it
Yep.
in this
That's a
moment.
chapter.
Just
That's
the
a chapter.
ugh, you
That's
know?
a chapter.
It's just the ugh.
That's a chapter.
Yeah.
I know we behind y'all. I got
We gonna let y'all go. I know Dr. Green has something else to say.
I'm done, y'all. I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done. Thank y'all
Thank
for
you.
breaking bread with us. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Follow us. We on, updates on Twitter and towardequity.com or .org.
Twowordequity.com.
.com.
Yeah.
.com. Check us out. Check out Racially Just Schools podcast. We're on Twitter. So check us
It's
out.
fire.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn, for your comments and questions and for being in the space and everybody. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you for being here. All righty. Y'all have a good night.
Y'all have a good night.
Signing off. Bye-bye.